Well, we know that this LSU football defensive back room, it needs some help. Specifically, the safeties, it needs some help. It needs some depth. It needs some veterans. It needs some experience. Could help be on the way.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Plus, don't forget that you can also watch us on YouTube as well. So if you're driving around in your car, of course, you can always listen to us on your preferred podcast platform, but you can throw us up on your smartphone, on your smart TV, on your computer, and watch the podcast as well as listen. My name is Caroline Fenton, and I am your host, as I am every day. You can follow me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton1. You can also follow along with some podcast updates at Locked On LSU on Twitter. However you interact, however you watch, just appreciate you for being here and always appreciate you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. Let's get into it. As we know, the transfer portal and the spring transfer portal period has closed. That closed on April 30th. And so on the LSU side of things, not a single LSU football player elected to enter the transfer portal. At least LSU scholarship player rather has elected to enter the transfer portal, which is massive. It is massive for this program for several different reasons. One, it means that Brian Kelly is doing something right. That Brian Kelly is offering an experience when these players are getting recruited both out of high school and the transfer portal that they are delivering on. It also means that there's clear communication and healthy competition going on behind the closed doors in that locker room. And it means that this team wants to be part of, and these individual players want to be part of what is being built at LSU. And I go into full depth and detail of this on May 1st on I believe that was Monday's edition of Locked On LSU. So you can find that on your preferred podcast platform. You can find it on YouTube. But that's the LSU side of things. I want to pivot to the outside of LSU players or pieces that could eventually come LSU's way. Pieces in the transfer portal that play a position of need, that could add some depth, at some positions that do need some depth, and some players that just make sense. I've been breaking down some of those players all week long, offensively, defensively. I've been doing that all week long. But as the week progresses, and as more and more players start to announce where they're going to take their visits, as more and more players start to announce where they are ultimately going to play at the next level, we're starting to get a few more clues as to some positions and some players that Brian Kelly, this entire coaching staff, and this entire recruiting staff could be looking for to add to their team before summer camp and fall camp kicks off later on in the summer. And one name that has come up a lot around LSU circles, one name that's been slated with the Titans pretty frequently over the last few days, is a name that we haven't talked about quite yet. And that's Trey Amos, the corner out of ULL. He's from New Iberia. He's got 2 years of eligibility remaining. Now let's go back to the very beginning with Brian Kelly. Some of his priorities for building this football team. One, keeping good talent in state and bringing them to LSU. The second thing, the transfer, and that's the philosophy for recruiting players at all levels. The other priorities, more specifically when targeting players in the transfer portal, is making sure that you're going to be able to have them for a while. In Brian Kelly's first year, he and Matt House and the rest of the recruiting staff, they had to fully rebuild that entire cornerback room. So they just had to pick up any pieces that they could find that they felt fit that system, that filled that philosophy. They couldn't really pick and choose on how many years of eligibility were remaining. But then that left Brian Kelly and Matt House and this entire recruiting staff to do the exact same thing all over again in year 2. because the players that they did recruit via the transfer portal to play corner and in safety for this team out of the transfer portal, who did a fine job, they only have 1 year of eligibility remaining. So that kind of became the priority of, now that we can be a little bit pickier and choosier, let's try and find guys that are going to have the ability to give us at least more than 1 year for the most part. That's not a blanket statement, but for the most part, because we don't want to be back in this situation, not just with the corners, but with any position group. We don't want to be forced to be back in this situation all over again, where we're constantly recruiting from the transfer portal and rebuilding an entire position group every single year. I mean, that's just exhausting. But that's what LSU football is faced with this season, with the cornerback room, with the safeties, with really the defensive backs as a whole, which is why Trey Amos is a perfect target. I'm not going to say fit, because I don't know what kind of person he is. I don't know how he plays. I don't know how he would really integrate into this locker room. But two of the priorities that Brian Kelly has set for this football team and how they want to recruit, Trey Amos fills those qualifications. He checks those boxes. He's from Louisiana. He is a local kid from New Iberia. He has 2 years of eligibility remaining. He can help this team for the next 2 years and continue that philosophy of, we are not going to keep rebuilding the corners every single year. But a little bit about Trey Amos. Why? Not just why he's being targeted for, where he's from and how much time he has left, but what he does on the field. Coming out of high school, he was a 3-star recruit, 6 feet, 175 pounds, got some pretty good size to him. Not the tallest, lankiest guy out there. Not going to be the tallest corner that you see, but some pretty good height. He has 34 starts across his 3 years at ULL. So he was a starter in his first season. In 2022, he recorded 35 tackles. One of those are for loss. Didn't record a single interception in the 2022 season. Only has 1 interception on his career, and that came in the 2020 season. So it's not necessarily stats that really jump off the page, but I think it's other things that Trey Amos can bring to the table. And it's going to be a competitive recruitment for Trey Amos. He's planning visits, or already has visited. I believe he's planning these visits to A&M, to Alabama, to several other programs outside of the SEC. So it's not like Trey Amos is just some kid in your backyard that nobody else knows about. No. This is a very highly touted and highly recruited player in the transfer portal. The question being, one, does he want to stay in Louisiana? What does he want? I don't know. I can't control that. And 2, does he really fill your need? He's listed as a corner. He has played corner more consistently, more frequently than he has played safety at the college level. LSU needs safeties. And I know I'm kind of in the philosophy of, you can never have too many good quality corners, but this team needs safeties now. Like, that is a desperate need, especially considering how many injuries that safety position has withstood throughout the offseason. So can Trey Amos be one of those guys that can come in, and he's listed as a corner, but can he play safety? Can he play corner? Can he do what you need him to do? Can he be just a defensive back? That I don't know. But regardless, seems like a pretty solid player to be targeting that plays a position of need, corner or safety, who's from Louisiana, who can give you 2 more years. That's a guy that I'm going to be keeping an eye on, and I think that you should too. Trey Amos, the corner out of ULL. Coming up next, a few baseball updates. Southeastern on Tuesday. Auburn coming up this weekend. This LSU baseball team has got a whole lot of good and some bad going on with it as well. And I'll explain what I mean by that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Built Bar. So if you're looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want all the sugar, you don't want all the calories, then you need to try the best tasting protein bar ever. I promise you it's delicious. It's Built Bar. If you're like me and you want to start making some healthier snack choices, but you don't want to compromise on taste, then Built is the perfect thing for you. Built Bars and Built Puffs are healthy. They taste amazing. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. real chocolate. They taste like a dessert. Plus, they come in dessert-like flavors like churro and peanut butter brownie and cookies and cream. And I'm not really sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And they don't taste healthy. You know those things that you eat and you're like, yep, tastes healthy. Not necessarily a good thing. That's not the case with Built, but they are healthy. Only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. They can keep you full for hours. And now you don't need to wait to get around to get a box. For years, I've been telling you that you can order Built bars at Built.com, which of course you still can, but you can also get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club while you still can get your specialty flavors still at Built.com. So you can head to Walmart, go to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or the coconut puffs. Or if you're closer to a Sam's Club, then run in there, grab a 13-bar box with the hit flavors brownie batter and churro puff. So delicious, good for you. You can thank me later. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Every dayers coming up on tomorrow's podcast. We've got the preseason top 25, an updated one. Where does LSU fall? And where do some other teams on LSU's schedule fall? That is coming up on tomorrow's podcast. But first, we're going to break down a little bit of LSU baseball news. And let me just give this team a round of applause for finally breaking that midweek skid, back-to-back midweek losses. I mean, it's as much as I don't put a whole lot of weight into midweek wins or losses, it comes a certain point where it's like, come on, you're the number 1 team in the country. Like you need to be beating Nichols. Like, come on, like let's be real. So they finally did that, and they did it in dramatic fashion. Took down Southeastern 10-0 in Hammond, ruled them in 7 innings. Gavin Guidry got the start, which you're probably thinking, wait, are you sure? Like, are you saying the right person? Are you sure it's Gavin Guidry? Because he's never started before in his college career. And you would be correct. And I would also be correct. Gavin Guidry got his very first college start. He got 4 strikeouts, walked 1, allowed 0 hits. And Gavin Guidry even came out after the game and said, look, like I was on a pitch count. That was something that was very well understood between Jay Johnson, Wes Johnson, pitching coach, and he was on a 45 pitch count. Went 2 1/3 innings. He didn't quite get to that 45 pitch threshold. I think he had just over 30 pitches on the game. But that's one of the reasons why I don't put too much weight into midweek games, is because these are experimental games. Like Jay Johnson is looking at his bullpen and is looking at his starting rotation, and it's starting to dwindle. You know, the Tommy Johns and the nicks and the bumps and the bruises, they're starting to get the worst of this LSU pitching staff. The injury bug is in full effect for sure. Knock on wood that it doesn't get any worse. But Jay Johnson is just trying to experiment with this bullpen, see what guys could potentially emerge as starters if they need to do so. So that's why I don't put too much weight into these games. Is if Gavin Guidry went out there and just had an absolutely horrendous start, and then LSU ultimately lost that game, I could look at it and say, well, Jay Johnson tried something and it didn't work, so they're not going to do it against Auburn. That's fair. I can live with that. But of course, Gavin Guidry went out there. I think he got a fine start. I think he had an absolutely fine start. It's hard to take too much away whenever he was on such a pitch count and whenever he was only out there for just over 2 innings. But from what I saw, I liked. And Jay Johnson said he's just exploring his starting options. And I can respect that. But in that game on Tuesday, we saw an absolute haul of pitchers. And I don't think that was by accident. I looked at that in the same thing that I just said, that you're going to have to see some more from some of these pitchers, from some of your guys, because you're going to probably have to use a lot of these guys more than you initially expected because of the injuries that are plaguing this team. So Gavin Guidry got the start. Blake Money came in relief. And then, of course, as I'm talking about the injury bug, Blake Money left with some arm discomfort. So I'm hoping that that's what it stays at, was a little bit of discomfort, got tweaked a little bit, and, through kind of a weird something, and something got tweaked. So Blake Money left the game, hoping it's something that's a little bit more optimistic than some other things we've heard, and I'll get to that. Micah Bucknam also came in, only threw a handful of pitches. He didn't even get a full inning of work in. He allowed 2 hits, walked 1, struck out 1, and hit 1 by pitch. Not a great outing there, but Nate Ockenhausen can't talk today. Pitched a full inning, struck out 1. Will Helmers also came in, pitched an inning, walked 1, struck 1 out. Sam Dutton got an inning, struck 1 out. So I think that Jay Johnson was just trying to see like a smorgasbord of some of the depth guys that they've got in that bullpen. And it was, okay, you go out there, show me what you got. Show me what you can do, because he might need to start showing me a whole lot more, a whole lot sooner than we ever expected. But I thought that this overall was just a good get-right game for LSU. After a couple of skids in the midweeks, go out there, run rule an in-state rival, get that confidence up, and get kind of all the mojo and the chemistry moving before you take on Auburn this weekend. Offensively, had a great game. Obviously, run ruled Southeastern in 7 innings. Gavin Dugas kind of struggled a little bit offensively versus Alabama. It looked like he kind of shook all of those yips off on Tuesday. He had a 2-run bomb, had 2 RBIs. Hayden Travinski just continues to be clutch at the plate. He also had 2 RBIs. Tommy White had 2 RBIs on the night as well. So just a good get-right game against Southeastern. I'm never going to get too high, never going to get too low, but at least I like what I saw going into Auburn. That's got a whole lot of momentum after almost sweeping South Carolina, who I thought was one of the top teams in the league, if not the top team in the league, just a couple of weeks ago. So Auburn's got all the juice flowing on their end. So a lot of good stuff that I'm saying about LSU baseball. Let's go to the bad side. It was announced earlier this week that Garrett Edwards is out for the season. He and Chase Shores each will be undergoing Tommy John surgery with torn UCLs. Yet another Tommy John casualty for this bullpen. And that one really hurts, because Garrett Edwards really was a go-to guy coming out of the bullpen. That he was one of the top relievers that Jay Johnson could look to in times that mattered most. And really, Chase Shores was emerging as that as well. As young as he was, he and Garrett Edwards were both kind of the 2 go-to guys. So it's gonna be a hit. I mean, Garrett Edwards was pitching really well this season. Got 4 wins on the season, had lower than a 2.0 ERA, pitched in 10 games, 27 strikeouts in 10 games, only allowed 16 hits. Garrett Edwards, it's tough. It's rough. It's a hit to your bullpen that really this team can't afford to take many more of. And that's the other thing that I mentioned with Chase Shores is Tommy John is not just a quick recovery, couple months recovery, and then you're back. No. I don't even know if Garrett Edwards and Chase Shores are going to be able to be back this time next year. They might not even be back for the postseason next year. It may not be until 2025, which sounds like light years away, until you could see Garrett Edwards and Chase Shores back out there. So that sucks. I mean, without putting it in poetic language, it sucks. It really does. LSU on the road at Auburn this weekend. I'll give you a full Auburn breakdown on the Friday edition of Locked on LSU. Coming up next, it is a Mailbag Wednesday. I appreciate everybody for getting those questions in. We'll get to those questions coming up next. Well, thanks again for making Locked on LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Happy Mailbag Wednesday. Thank you to everybody who sent in your questions. Remember, I do a Mailbag Wednesday every single week, so you can send your questions in on Twitter at CarolineFenton1. You can comment them below on the YouTube page if that's where you choose to watch. You can send them in on Twitter at LockedOnLSU. You can DM me, you can tweet me, however you like to get those questions in. Just love to see what you guys want to know about, what you guys want to hear about, whatever your discussions that you're having, with your friends at the water cooler, so on and so forth. But let's get into it. One of the more fun questions that I was asked, and I felt like it was very appropriate, kind of given right around draft season. One question was, which LSU football player that was just drafted do you think is going to win a Super Bowl first? And that's a fun, very hypothetical. And I'm going to just go off of the players that were drafted. No offense to the UDFAs. I'm just going off on the drafted players. And this isn't who I think is going to win the Super Bowl. This is just who I think is more likely or the most likely to win the Super Bowl. So let's break down the draft class. Let's do a little recap here. B.J. Ojulari drafted in the 2nd round by Arizona. Anthony Bradford, drafted by Seattle. Jay Ward and Jaquelin Roy, each drafted by Minnesota. Kayshon Boutte, drafted by the New England Patriots. And Jark Bernard-Converse, drafted by the New York Jets. Of those 5 teams, Arizona, Seattle, Minnesota, New England, and the Jets, who I think is most likely to win the Super Bowl and who's to do it first, I have to go with Jark Bernard-Converse and the New York Jets. I was so tempted to say Minnesota just because that's a team that offensively looked really, really good this past season, mostly because of Justin Jefferson. But looking what the New York Jets did, I mean, they just brought in Aaron freaking Rodgers, first of all. So automatically it's going to up your Super Bowl stock infinitely. They got the reigning offensive and defensive rookies of the year. They brought in even more help for Aaron Rodgers. They just signed Alan Lazard and why is his name just escaping me? The old guy. Randall Cobb, goodness. And that defense is really, really solid. So that Aaron Rodgers, as good as he is, and as much as he elevates teams, he's stepping into a team that really only needed, a solid starting quarterback. And that's exactly what they got in Aaron Rodgers. So of Arizona, Seattle, Minnesota, New England, and the Jets, I'm putting my money on the Jets to win a Super Bowl first. Jark Bernard-Converse, get yourself a ring. Congratulations, brother. Good for you. Good for you. That was a fun one. Appreciate that one. Next one. Do you think that Alabama is going to have the best offensive coordinator quarterback duo in the league, in the SEC? I've been hearing a lot that they might. My initial reaction to that was, what? No. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to just go ahead and shut that down, say, no, you're crazy. I'm not. So okay, let's do a little bit of research here. Backtrack a little bit. Some behind the scenes, news that you may have missed. So Tommy Rees, offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, was hired by Nick Saban to be Alabama's offensive coordinator. It came out a few days ago that Tyler Buchner, the former Notre Dame quarterback, transferred to Alabama. He was one of the first, or one of the biggest, probably one of the biggest news stories of a spring transfer portal player. Tyler Buchner going to Alabama. So I see the connection there of Tommy Rees and Tyler Buchner, a quarterback and offensive coordinator that already know each other, that have that rapport, that have that chemistry. Tommy Rees knows what Tyler Buchner can do. Tyler Buchner knows what is going to be expected of him by Tommy Rees. I get that. I understand that line of thinking. You're not crazy. But also, it's not like Tommy Rees won an exorbitant amount of really competitive games in his tenure at Notre Dame. In 2021, Notre Dame won 11-1. That is a great season. It's a fantastic season. But they played 2 ranked teams that season. And against those 2 ranked teams, they went 1-1. They beat Wisconsin, who was the number 18 team at the time. But then Wisconsin went on to go 8-4. It's not like Wisconsin was necessarily the elite of the league. And they lost to Cincinnati. Cincinnati, of course, went on to win the college football playoff. They were undefeated that season. Then they got whooped by Alabama in the college football playoff. So those 2 ranked teams, one was a win, one was a loss. I can't translate that to the SEC or the SEC competition that those 2 are going to be facing. But let's look at Tyler Buchner and his career so far at Notre Dame. In 2021, he only had 35 total pass attempts. And it was, it was a couple of throws here, couple throws there. He was not a consistent starter by any stretch of the imagination. 2022, he played in 3 games. And in those 3 games, he went 1-2, including a loss to Marshall, where he was 18 of 32, threw for 201 yards, 0 touchdowns, and an interception. In the games that we saw Tyler Buchner in 2022, he threw 3 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. Tyler Buchner isn't even the best quarterback in the SEC. I wouldn't consider him a top 5 quarterback in the SEC. So how can I make the claim or agree with the claim that Tyler Buchner and Tommy Rees are going to be the best duo in the league whenever Tyler Buchner doesn't even really have a great resume? And also, I think that there's another element to this here too. I know that they already have that rapport, they have that chemistry 100%. That's not something that you can manufacture quickly or artificially. But go back to Jaden Daniels in his first few games at LSU. And keep in mind, Jaden Daniels at the time had been a starter for 3 years. Tyler Buchner doesn't have nearly the number of snaps that Jaden Daniels had under his belt coming into LSU. But there was a very obvious learning curve that Jaden Daniels had to get over. And of course, that was a learning curve of the offense, the learning curve of learning the receivers and the offensive line. But I do think there was a good bit of truth to the fact that Jaden Daniels just had to get used to the level of play in the SEC. I will not be surprised if Tyler Buchner goes through that same kind of learning curve. Notre Dame, they're a good team, but they don't necessarily play a gauntlet. Notre Dame isn't a team that plays 6, 7 ranked teams consistently every single season. When you're a team in the SEC, you do. You do play that many ranked teams consistently every single season. You are facing the top defensive players and the top defenses in the country. So I won't be surprised if that takes a little bit of time for those two to get acclimated to what is expected and what the style of play is in this league. Also, with that being said, I'm never going to count out the Saban factor. I mean, Saban's done a whole lot more with a whole lot less in the past, but that's a long, drawn-out explanation and breakdown to just say, no, I don't think that Tommy Rees and Tyler Buchner are going to be the best OC-QB combo in the SEC. I don't believe that in the slightest. If they are, they're going to have to show me before I can believe it. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. Every dayers on tomorrow's podcast. Preseason top 25. It's updated. Where does LSU fall? Where do their competitors fall? Coming up on tomorrow's podcast of Locked On LSU.